All right. So first, we'd like to welcome you today. This is a presentation co-hosted by University Settlement and Sanctuary for Families. The three of us here will briefly go through and introduce ourselves. Really happy to be here. So first, my name is Katie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a case manager with the non-residential program at Sanctuary for Families.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bushra Hussein, and I use she and her pronouns, and I am one of the program directors at Sanctuary for Families.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Good evening. My name is Joy Liu. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a clinical social worker, so a therapist in the DV aftercare program at University Settlement. And I'll just briefly go over some community guidelines and we can do a self-care kind of exercise. How does that sound? So first off, I see a lot of you guys are already kind of typing in the chat. Awesome. So all your questions will be addressed, well, most of them, I hope, in the chat. And we also are going to have a Q&A at the very end. We're going to cover general EHV information, and then we're also going to have an office hour after this. So don't worry, we're going to keep supporting you guys. And then next week, we're doing another part 2 of this webinar. So hopefully you can join us then. And just remember that like all of this is recorded. So I know you guys are probably taking notes or excited about all this and want to catch everything. So no worries. We have lots of opportunities for you to revisit the materials and hopefully get your questions answered. So before we like started with all this content, I just want you to listen to your body, listen to your mind, and just keep in mind that a lot of this material could be kind of triggering too, right? It has to do with housing. And so if you need to step away, like go for it and take a break, get some water. But let's start with just kind of grounding ourselves, right? In your head, or even if you just want to repeat out loud because no one could hear you. So this is great. So repeat after me. I choose to be responsible for my physical and mental health. All right. So I want you to think of just something that you're stressed about. It could be something that happened today. It could be something related to EHV and the voucher. It could be related to housing. Just think about something you're stressed about. It could be the whole thing, or it just could be one thing. And I want you to just gently close your eyes and just to notice where you feel it in your body, right? So it could be your knees, it could be your back, it could be your head. For me, it's my chest. So I'm just going to put my hand over my chest. So I want you to do the same. Just gently place your hand over that part of your body if you're able, where you feel that source of stress. Good. Okay, can you advance? And now I just want you to take 3 soft, mindful breaths. So we'll do this by first inhaling through our nose. So gently notice the air coming in and just hold it there for a bit and then exhale through your mouth. Good. Let's do 2 more. So in through your nose and then exhale through your mouth. Awesome. Let's do 1 more. In through your nose, feel the air enter your lungs. And then exhale, like fogging up the bathroom mirror. Good. Okay, now I want you to shift your attention by slowly opening your eyes and just notice and describe one thing that you see in front of you. What I mean by describe is just like I see a black chest in front of me, right? So we're going to do 4 things, and you can do this even in the chat. If you want to do this in the chat, go for it, or you could just say it in your head. I notice a glass of water. I notice my white bottle of lotion. I notice my silver keyboard. Good. And now I want you to go ahead and just list 3 things that you can feel, right? So take some time, just notice what you're touching. I still notice my warm hand on my chest. I notice the firm chair that I'm sitting on. I notice my hand on the cold kind of table in front of me. Good. And you're welcome to type this in the chat too if you want, or just kind of think and feel. All right, so the next one's 2 things that you can hear. I hear the rain outside. What do you guys hear? I also hear this kind of buzz of electricity. Good. And then lastly, one thing you can smell. That's kind of hard. I smell my rice cooker. What do you guys smell? I like how Sarah put she can hear her cat purring. Good. So hopefully you guys feel a little bit more present and grounded. And I want you to just again take note of your body, observe what is happening, and just feel if there's a little bit of difference, you know, from the start. Hopefully you feel more grounded. Thank you guys for participating with me. Hopefully this will be useful to you when you feel a little bit dysregulated or a little imbalanced, that you can bring yourself or center yourself. All right, so let's chat about what's the next? Oh no, you're doing it, right? Go ahead with the part 1 and 2. Go ahead, Katie, sorry.
Thank you, Joy, for that. That was really nice. I think making sure that we're staying grounded in all of this. It's a high stress topic for sure. So to start and end with that is a really nice way to keep us centered. So to begin this, we'll go over kind of what the different parts of this webinar presentation are. So we had part 1 all the way back in November. I don't know if you remember then, I barely do. But we went over a lot of the basics of the emergency housing vouchers. Like, what is the program? What was it from? What are the different parts of the EHV? You know, the unit sizes, payment standards, all that good type of stuff. We also talked a lot about tenant rights and responsibilities. So looking at housing rights, what are your rights? What does the landlord have to do? Things like that. And we went over the recertification process for annual recertifications and interim recertifications. And so all of these materials, the recording of that and all of the slides, the handouts from last presentation are available, and I'll be sharing the link again after this via email, but those are all available to you to review that material. We'll be moving on to the topic of focusing on transfers, moves, and more for our part 2, and then part 2 is even further broken down because there was just too much content to fit into one. So today is March 27th. We're talking about part 2A, which is how to start the emergency housing voucher transfer process and how to do the apartment search in New York City. It's a scary, scary place out here. So we're going to talk about that. And then next week, same time, same day, we're going to talk more about the paperwork and the move-in process, all the logistics and of that. So that's what's coming. All of these will be recorded. Everything will be handed out afterwards. So today, how to start the EHV transfer and apartment search process. So to review, I want to go over a little bit of what is the EHV program. This is reviewing from part 1. It's been a long time. And a lot of you may have emergency housing vouchers, work with people who have emergency housing vouchers. And we want to talk about this is an awesome program. The EHVs are federally subsidized housing, tenant assistance that's guaranteed for 10 years. And it's offered through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which we call HUD, and then is administered by local public housing agencies, which are PHAs. And so we're going to be talking in a lot of acronyms, and I know that this is like very weird and jargony, so feel free to, you know, step away, Google, do whatever you need. We'll try and keep this as approachable as possible. But EHVs are a federal form of assistance that is then administered by local city agencies. And here in New York City, we have NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, and HPD, which is the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. So if you have an emergency housing voucher, it's either administered by NYCHA or by HPD. And this program is amazing. We had over 7,000 emergency housing vouchers allotted to NYCHA and HPD. And this was all came out of like the COVID pandemic, housing crisis, and they only accepted like a limited number of applications, and the referrals and applications stopped being accepted in September of 2022. So people can't get new emergency housing vouchers now. So if you have one, amazing that you were able to get it during that time. It's pretty limited, but now we'll talk about kind of what you can do with that. And to do that, we're going to go through an example, a case study, because I know that every single emergency housing voucher case person is totally different. So we're going to walk through one example of what that might look like. So our case study is Amy. Amy has an emergency housing voucher. She's used it to move into permanent housing in an apartment, but now she needs to move. She experienced a domestic violence incident at her apartment, and now it's not safe for her to stay. Her address has been compromised. So we're going to talk about the whole moving process from Amy's perspective. To start, we're going to go through an overview of the whole moving process. It's going to be a lot. I am going to tell you that right now. We're not going to cover all of this today. I just want to give everyone a very big picture of what this process might look like. Also, just know that it does differ a lot between every one different person, but we're going to go through the different parts now. So to start, Amy's going to request a transfer.
Katie, there's someone whose hand is up. Tawana?
Tawana, if you have any questions, if you could put them in the chat, that would be wonderful. And if you still have questions and aren't able to put it in the chat, then we'll wait till the end of the slide and then answer those. So to start, Amy's going to request a transfer. Then she's going to get her move voucher. She's going to get her PIN letter or landlord packet. She's going to do the apartment search, find a new place. When she finds a new apartment, applies, the landlord wants to rent it to her. Then they're going to do the rental package, submit it to whatever her housing agency is. Then they're going to review it, determine if, is the rent reasonable? Is this a good place? Can the landlord rent it out? Then once that's approved, there's an inspection. Once you pass the inspection, then you're going to get a conditional move-in letter. And Amy is also going to have a HAP contract, which is a housing assistance payments contract, that the landlord and the housing agency will work to make sure that all of this paperwork is done. Amy will also use her conditional move-in letter to apply for moving assistance if she wants to do so. Unfortunately, with a second move with EHV, you're not eligible for the same types of incentives the second time around, but we'll talk about that later. But then once you have the HAP contract, you have that, you return it back to NYCHA HPD, and then you have your lease. Once you have the lease, you send it all back to NYCHA HPD. Everything gets reviewed, everything looks good, and then Amy can move in. So I know that this is a lot. And if your moving process does not look like this, that is okay. This is just a general overview, and we'll talk through the different stages of this process. This will be today, only the first part, and then next week will be this other part of it. I'm going to try and put some time frames on parts of this process, but the timing is super variable. It's really hard to know. So we're going to do the best we can with the limited information that we have, knowing that it varies a lot between agencies, between different people, between different scenarios. Okay. So great question in the chat. We'll get there next. So to start, Amy requests a transfer. How does she do that? Now we're going to talk about the different types of transfers. And the first type of transfer is an emergency transfer. So this is what Amy needs. She needs to move because of an emergency reason. And this can happen at any time. Maybe you're 6 months into your apartment, living in your apartment, and an emergency happens and you have to leave. That would be an emergency transfer. You can also have a voluntary transfer, which is, I've been living in this apartment for a year, but I think I want to maybe move closer to work. I just want to move to a different area. That's also totally fair. So that's a voluntary transfer. These are both happening within New York City, staying within the 5 boroughs. And then the third option is called portability. And so this is when you're porting your voucher and you're moving outside of New York City. you can use your voucher anywhere in the US, Puerto Rico, or the US Virgin Islands, as long as there is a Section 8 program, which is like a housing choice voucher program administered in that area. So you have the whole country as your oyster here, and if you want to move out of the city, you totally can do that. They'll just transfer your voucher from either NYCHA or HPD to the public housing agency, wherever it is that you're trying to move to. So those are the 3 types of transfers. Now we're going to go through them a little bit more specifically. So type 1, emergency transfer. So there are a lot of different reasons that you might need to transfer, and like was mentioned in the chat, it might not be a domestic violence reason. There are many, many reasons why you might need an emergency transfer. So for example, domestic violence. This is what Amy needs. She'll have to show, reason for this, showing why she's not safe in her current apartment. And this is when, for any reason, like you've suffered serious and repeated abuse from a family member or a person with whom you had or continue to have an intimate relationship, and as a result of that abuse, have suffered injury or the threat of injury and will continue to suffer by continuing to live in your current residence. There has to be some type of threat that's tied to your current apartment for it to be a domestic violence emergency transfer. Next, you have intimidated victim or witness, and this is, it is a little, so it's like if the tenant is the victim of a violent crime or like a non-random crime, and they suffered injury or threats of injury, and it's tied to them like living in their apartment. So that would be the intimidated victim. And then there's also intimidated witness, as if like a person is cooperating with a law enforcement agency in the arrest or prosecution of an individual who committed a crime. And then there's a threat because of that reason. Next, there's court action by landlord to regain possession of or property, or if there's foreclosure. So maybe there's like a holdover eviction case, but you've still been paying your rent, you just need to get out. That counts. If the property is getting foreclosed, if the landlord wants to repossess the unit, you get a notice to vacate, something like that, that would count as an emergency transfer. You can also have 90 days in, so HQS is housing quality standards, and this is basically like the inspection. So if you spent 90 days in housing quality standard failure, which means that like, you asked for an inspection, they found it, that the unit didn't pass, and then after, working with the landlord and working with your agency to try and get this fixed, it's still not fixed, you can get an emergency transfer for that reason. There can also be an emergency housing quality standard failure, which is if that's like there's like a 24-hour like life-threatening HQS reason, which is like there's a gas leak, there's like building structural damage, something happened and the owner failed to complete repairs within 24 hours of the inspection, if it's like an emergency life-threatening reason. There also can be natural disasters, there can be fires, there can be stoppage of utilities due to hazardous conditions. The apartment burns down, you gotta move. Things like that happen if there are any particular reasons. That is allowed for here. The last option here is reasonable accommodation, and that is if a tenant or their household member qualifies as disabled and that requires a change in their housing. So for example, maybe you need to live on a first floor unit or in a building with an elevator, or someone needs more space. Maybe you need a unit of a larger size due to a disability, and so you can get an emergency transfer for that reason as well. And with all of this, you will likely need to submit supporting documentation to justify, like, why do you need this emergency transfer? And so it's hyperlinked in the slide, so you'll be able to click on it when you get it later. But basically, there's a lot of different documents that you'll need to submit, and they'll be able to work with you with whatever documents you do have. But in the example of Amy, because she had a domestic violence incident, she can use like a police report, a hospital report, an advocacy letter from her counselor, her case manager, something like that, to be able to prove that there is a threat and that she needs to move. So if you have HPD, how to request an emergency transfer is by filling out the emergency move request form. And with this, you can see the form here on the screen. Basically, you fill out, your name and what is the reason and what documents am I attaching, a brief description of the reason, then you submit it to HPD. It's You're going to send it in. You can send it in via email. You can give it to them in person. You can mail it in. A few different options with that. With NYCHA, they want everything to be online. NYCHA loves their self-service portal. And so they want you to basically do everything in there. We'll be looking a lot at the self-service portal today. And so there is a Section 8 transfer request in the NYCHA self-service portal. And what this looks like is this is like a this is a client's NYCHA self-service portal that is de-identified. And here, this is like what the homepage looks like when you go in. Then you have your Section 8 account. Emergency housing vouchers basically like fall under the Section 8 category. They're administered like Section 8 vouchers. And so we're basically going to be like following those rules. And so you're going to click on manage your account. That's going to bring you to this screen. And you'll click on the Section 8 transfer that is highlighted in red. And then you're gonna get a screen that looks like this, and you're gonna want to start/resume my transfer request. And then once you do that, you're gonna get this screen, and then you have to choose the reason for your transfer request. So you can see, if it's a voluntary move, there's fire, rent hardship, intimidated victim, you need different sizing, HQS violation, natural disaster, court action, all of these reasons that we talked about. And because Amy had a domestic violence reason, that falls into the VAWA, Violence Against Women Act category. And so that transfer type, she would pick that. And then in the dropdown, she'd pick victim of domestic violence and then would press the continue. Then she'll upload her supporting documentation and we'll get the next voucher. So other type of transfer is the voluntary transfer. This is just when, you're ready to go and find a new place. There's no like emergency reason why you're doing so. So for HPD, how to do this, again, a form. So this is the request to move form for Section 8 for HPD. And there are a few requirements for both NYCHA and HPD for this voluntary transfer. They don't want you like moving into an apartment and then like 2 months later being like, you know what, I want to go to a different place. So they want you to have been in your apartment and subsidized for a year. And so you have to not have received a move voucher within the last 12 months. You must have also completed your annual recertification within the past 6 months. Basically, this is looking like you need to be up to date with your voucher, you need to be current with your portion of the rent, and either you're at the end of your lease or your landlord is okay with you, being released from your lease. So you can get a form from your landlord. And so that was what that form is going to look like. Same thing, submit it via email, drop it off in person, mail it in. Probably don't mail it in. It's going to get lost. So either bring it in person, take lots of pictures of it, or submit it via email. Now with NYCHA, again, their self-service portal. So now you're going to request it in your self-service portal in the same spot that you were doing before. And this is going to be after 10 months of a rental. So you can only start the request after 10 months of being subsidized in your current apartment. And this is like the same screen as we were at before, but instead of choosing, like an emergency transfer type, we're going to choose voluntary move. Great question. And that leads us perfectly into our next category, which is portability, moving outside of New York City. So, EHV portability. In NYCHA, as I'll show you in a minute, again, we're in the self-service portal. There's a portability tab, a little section, like there was a Section 8 transfer section. There's a portability section, and you can request a port out in there. There's also a form you could use, which you can get by calling the customer contact center, but it's easiest to do it online if that is an option for you. HPD wants another form, and you're going to fill that out. Basically, like, I want to port out. Where do I want to port out to? And then you're going to submit that form to HPD. With both of these, you're going to need the information of where you're going. So the PHA, again, lots of jargon, Public Housing Agency. And we have here in New York City, the public housing agencies administering the EHVs are NYCHA and HPD. But in different parts of the state and different parts of the country, there are lots of different public housing agencies, and those different public housing agencies administer Section 8 in their regions. And so you're going to have to find, where do I want to move? What is that region? And then what is the public housing agency in that region? And you can use this link, which will be hyperlinked again on the slides, that you can click on it and take you there, but it's basically like a search page online, and will show you what the different agency is in that area where you're trying to move to, and what is the contact information for that public housing agency. It is important to keep in mind that the rules and regulations of the public housing agency that is like receiving your voucher, it's going to be different probably from NYCHA and HPD. They may recalculate your voucher size, they may recalculate your income, your portion, things like that. Like, it does differ between area to area. It even differs between NYCHA and HPD a little bit. So you just want to, be really mindful about wherever you're going, planning that in advance, knowing the information about where you're trying to go, and knowing what that will look like. What does that look like if you have your voucher transferred to that new public housing agency? Can you then do your housing search there? What is going to change? And then if you decide you don't want to lease a unit in that area, you have to notify that receiving public housing agency, because they can transfer your Section 8 voucher from the city to the different area, but they need to know in order to make that transfer. And good question in the chat. So this is basically how you would transfer your voucher to another state. And you will probably not be able to do this if you're in the middle of a lease and your landlord doesn't want to release you. But again, you can get that landlord release form for them to be able to let you leave in the middle of a current lease. And so going back at the NYCHA self-service portal, the portability transfer outside 5 boroughs is that spot where you'd be able to request that portability transfer. And then with HPD, it's, again, another form. Now, Amy gets her emergency housing voucher and the PIN letter / landlord packet. And so you've done your request, great, it's been approved. Amy gets her emergency housing voucher. So every one of you who has an emergency housing voucher, like, you will recognize this. Those of you who worked with it, you probably also recognize this. This is what the EHV looks like. And this is a slide actually from the last presentation, but it is really important, so we're going to go over it again. First, we have your voucher number. That is your identifying information. Like, that is your number. That is how they're able to identify your voucher. Next is your unit size. So that's like the number of bedrooms in your unit. So if, Amy has a son, she is given a 2-bedroom voucher, and so her unit size would be 2. Sorry about that. And then next you have the date that the voucher was issued, date that it expires, and then if you have an extension, the date that the extension expires. And then here you can see that's your name and signature. Whenever they issue a voucher, you're gonna have to basically like, yes, I got it. I know what I'm doing with it. And so you have to put your name and sign it. And then that is the name of the public housing agency administering your voucher, either NYCHA or HPD. So you can see here in this example, it's NYCHA. Now, payment standards. So payment standard is the maximum amount the voucher will pay for monthly gross rent. This is an important determination because monthly gross rent is rent plus utilities. So that's basically like, if you have a voucher, your payment standard is like the max total monthly cost of the apartment you're trying to move to. And so there are the general payment standards, which are listed here. Those update every year. So these are the 2024 payment standards. You can also find them online. And then for certain zip codes, there are the exception payment standards. And this is because they want your voucher to be able to basically reflect the market rates. They want you to be able to use your voucher to rent in different areas, to rent in a place that might be more expensive, to go into those different neighborhoods. So the voucher payment standards will change based off of the zip code, especially if that zip code, the market rent is higher than what is in the normal payment standards. and those are the same for both NYCHA and HPD. They depend on your bedroom size of your voucher. You can select a larger or smaller unit size than is on your voucher, but if you choose something smaller, then HPD and NYCHA will use the payment standard and utility allowance for the lower unit size based off of the voucher. So if you have a 3-bedroom voucher, but then you rent a 2-bedroom, they're gonna end up giving you the 2-bedroom payment standard for that one. But if you use a 3-bedroom and you find a 4-bedroom that fits in the 3-bedroom payment standard, you can use that. So that is one of those tricky little situations there. So next, utility allowances. A utility allowance is applied if the cost of the utilities is not included in the rent, but is the responsibility of the tenant. So this differs between different situations. Sometimes your rent includes all the utilities, in which case no utility allowance and your payment standard is the same thing as your monthly gross rent. But a lot of times you'll have to pay some types of utilities. So for example, I pay for electric. What if Amy has to pay for electric in her unit, she has a 2-bedroom, then she would have this she would have this $109 utility allowance. You can find these charts online, and the utility allowances depend on the household unit size and what utilities you're responsible for. So basically, if you have to pay for any type of utilities, NYCHA and HPD are going to guesstimate kind of how much you're paying for that based off of these charts. They update them every year, and then they'll basically have it in their head that you're going to be paying that much for utilities, and so they're going to lower your portion of the rent by that much because they know that you're also paying for the utilities. So that is something to keep in mind, both the payment standards and the utility allowances when you are searching with your unit voucher. So the other thing that Amy gets with her voucher is the landlord package / PIN letter. And so for NYCHA, you get a PIN letter. They used to do a landlord package. They've gone digital. They have a PIN letter now. And so this, once you found a place and the landlord's like, great, you give them the PIN letter, and it allows them to go online, access and fill out all the forms in order to be able to move forward with the rental process. With HPD, all of the same forms, but again, it's all paper and it'll have to be mailed in or sent in a different way. This is the same process as when you moved into your current apartment if you are currently living in an apartment with an emergency housing voucher. So this may be a little bit repetitive, but just know that it is the same, whether it's your first or your second or your third move. And you give these documents to the respective landlord after you've already seen and applied to the unit. You usually give them your voucher during your search. So you're not giving them the package and the PIN letter, you're giving them the voucher, which looks like this. That doesn't really have a ton of personal identifying information, but you keep your landlord package and your PIN letter until you find a unit. Okay, now we have the apartment search. I will hand it over to Joy.
Thanks, Katie. Good job. All right, so you have your transfer, right? It's been approved. Now, how do you find an apartment? So with the NYCHA portal, they actually have a button that says available Section 8 apartments. So when you click it, it kind of takes you to a resource page, which actually is yeah, go ahead. Yeah, which is, well, it's actually a link. You could also access it as a PDF that we'll send out with resources for apartment search that NYCHA has put together, and we'll put it out. That we'll put the packet in the resources that Katie mentioned. Another thing is to look at no fee apartments, and this is generally through I would say your own kind of search, like NYCHA and HPD don't necessarily provide you with oh, here's specific no fee apartments, but except for that handout that it gave you. So Kings and Queens apartments. It's in 2 boroughs. These are known to have no fee apartments. So they take Section 8 housing vouchers, as well as they don't charge you, right? That's why they're called no fee apartments. Affordablehousing.com is what NYCHA kind of sends you to. So that's the other link there. You can go straight there, especially if you're HPD and you don't have access to that portal. And then there's Street Easy. But Street Easy, as you guys probably know, if you've kind of loosely searched, you can also, how do you say it? Like, you can also, how do you say it? Like when you wean out or whatever, like you can specifically look for no fee apartments as well, like within your search. So, next slide. I think what's important to remember is that you're pretty much on your own. Like I think when you first got your voucher, you definitely have support, from your housing navigator, whatever organization you came through. But with this transfer, the second time around, you're gonna do it on your own, right? And I think, a lot of you guys already have those tools, right? By I guess having gone through the first time. And so I've put here 2 brokers that New Destiny uses, and Julian and Barris, they're used to actually working with people that have Section 8 housing vouchers. And so they're very familiar with navigating it and communicating with landlords. And so I just have 2 numbers. And Julian also shared the email. So you can definitely reach out and say that you're referred by Sanctuary for Families, or through also University Settlement. You're welcome to do that. Barris usually does those luxury units, like those new developments. And these are just 2 that we found. Obviously, you guys reach out to your own networks, talk to folks, to your coworkers, to folks at your kid's school, like just build that community of how to look for an apartment. I also want to remind you, though, that when you do not have a safety transfer, so non-safety transfers, non-emergency safety transfers, meaning it's a voluntary transfer, then you're responsible for the broker's fees. And Katie can explain more in terms of what HRA, they will cover a little bit of it, but for the most part, it's a voluntary transfer. So you will be responsible for the first month's rent, for the security deposit, and for the broker's fee. I also wanted to share New York City Housing Connect. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. This one, as well as Mishilama, these are the city's way of providing affordable housing network and system since like 2012. And it's pretty cool. Like it's super easy. You just put down your household size, and you can do like your income. But the good news is that there is a section of the profile when you're setting it up, super short questionnaire thing that's all online, is that you could put in that you're a Section 8 recipient. And when you are putting that information in, they ask if it's HPD or if it's NYCHA. So it's pretty self-explanatory when you do the whole, like, if you see on the top, it says log in. So you can do that, but you create a login and go through the profile. And then when you search, again, you can refine it. That's the word I was looking for. You could refine it by, I was like, wean out. I don't know what I was saying. You could refine it by your location, by what trains you want to be next to, by what neighborhoods, by what boroughs. It's super specific. It's easy to use, but it is the lottery system, so it's not guaranteed. And they do prioritize if you're already living in the neighborhood. So if you already are like community board 3 or whatever, and you're applying for one of those new buildings in that same neighborhood, you will be kind of bumped up, if that makes sense. And also if you have a disability in your profile, those are things that you can put down that will kind of bump you up and prioritize you for the lottery. Voucher holders do not have to meet minimum requirements. So when you're in there, just remember that you'll see like the unit size, right? 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom with a salary bracket. Just remember that because you're Section 8 and it's in your profile, you don't have to, it doesn't apply to you, I should say. Okay, so don't be turned off by it. Yeah. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that these apartments, yeah, they're cool. A lot of them are luxury, but they're often quite small. you know, people get excited because there's a doorman. A lot of them have rooftops or there's certain amenities, right? Like gyms, but the apartments were meant, you know, for just like 1 bedroom studio, 2 bedroom, you know, so just keep that in mind as well. Yeah, totally. Alicia's right. Like sometimes they make you pay a fee for those amenities like the gym and the like pool table. So yeah, a lot of times it's not as hot as we think it is. And one thing that Katie put together, which I thought was super helpful for you guys, is just questions to ask in an apartment search, which is something that you can also prepare your own personalized questions. Go ahead. Yeah, is asking having the broker ask, or you asking the landlord, have you rented with Section 8 before, right? Because that's definitely a process that the landlord it'll be new to them. They might need to be coached. What is the monthly rent for the unit, right? Also, what utilities are included in the rent and which would Amy or you be responsible for? Are there any fees associated with moving, right? Such as broker's fee and the security deposit. These are all things that you have to keep in mind if you do need assistance, right? And how you're going to get that, right? So that's something to always keep in mind. And what is the application process? And I think oftentimes Amy or other clients might be turned off by like, oh, they're doing a background check or, oh, a credit check or, you know, like, or even asking for an ID, right? And those, that process is normal, you know, it's like normal for this apartment application thing, you know? So keep that in mind too, you know, so that, you don't feel like, or Amy doesn't feel like defensive, right? Like, oh my God, background check, you know, but sometimes that's common.
Yeah, and one thing adding on to that is that there is a restriction that the application fee for an apartment can't be more than $20. And so that is like generally if you have like are applying to apartments, they'll ask for an application fee, it's 20 bucks. But sometimes they'll try and ask for more, and that's not legal. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more about these things, you know, like not every single person who's doing these listings knows all of the laws around them, or maybe they do and just start following them. So these are things to keep in mind. But if someone asks for an application fee of more than $20, don't pay it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll go into how to approach like discrimination. Yeah, we'll give you resources for that too. So many of you probably are asking like, what will you pay? Go ahead, Katie. So it's important to remember that you'll typically pay 30% of your monthly adjusted income towards rent and utilities. And that's something that I think your housing navigator must have calculated with you guys, right, in the beginning. So just remember that, or revisit that, especially those of you who got new jobs or different jobs or lost a job, right? We're all changing and transitioning in different moments. And you can rent an apartment with a gross rent that is more than the voucher payment standard. So the 40% rule always applies, that you're not going to be you're not going to be approved for that apartment if your share is 40%, more than 40% of your adjusted income. So keep that in mind. And your tenant portion of the rent may be higher, right? If some people in your family do not have an eligible immigration status. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, what is at the top of all of our minds while we're apartment searching is how much is this going to cost? And so always thinking about, you know, what that's going to be. And so as we talked through before a little bit with the payment standards, the utility allowances, the gross rent, it's all pretty tricky math, but we'll share some information about this afterwards. And it's really helpful to sit down and look at the numbers. So basically you want the monthly gross like rent plus utilities to be at or less than the voucher payment standard for whatever zip code you're looking to rent in. But if you choose an apartment with a gross rent that is over your voucher payment standard, you can only go over it by a certain amount, because at past the voucher payment standard, if the cost is higher, you're responsible for the entirety of that cost. So when it's like at or below the voucher payment standard, you are paying 30% of your monthly adjusted income. But if you go above that voucher payment standard with the gross rent, then you're responsible for that whole difference in addition to your normal 30%. And so NYCHA and HPD won't allow you to rent someplace that the 30% plus the extra is equal to more than 40% of your income. And that's because they don't want you to be renting a place where you're spending all of your money on rent. That's not really sustainable. It's, you got to pay for food, you got to pay for lots of other things that are going on. And so figuring out, what is that breakdown going to look like? Can I afford to give a little bit extra if I really want this apartment that's a little bit above the payment standard? But generally looking around the payment standard, maybe a little bit below, and knowing that you'll pay 30% of your monthly adjusted income toward the rent and utilities. And if you're covering utilities, then you'll have the slightly lower tenant portion to account for that, because then you'll be paying directly to, Con Ed or National Grid, whichever that is. And if your family, not all of your family has eligible immigration status, if you have, undocumented people in your family, the amount that you're subsidized is less, unfortunately. So it's basically like the percentage of your household that has eligible immigration status is like the percentage of the assistance that you would get. Like, so if everyone in your household has eligible immigration status, then you're getting like 100% of the normal of what we're looking at. But if, you have a family of 4 and only half have eligible status, then you're getting half of the amount of assistance. That is much harder scenario. And so then looking at, what you might be able to look at, that's going to change that math. So it's important to include that in all of your calculations.
So we're going to cover discrimination, I guess, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but like I'm looking at this and these are some of the comments that you may hear, which are illegal. And go ahead.
Wait, before we do that, Sarah has some questions in the chat about the eligible immigration status, I believe. Oh, shoot, I'm getting ahead of ourselves. And there we are. So for, yes, it does include children. So basically when you're calculating your household portion, they're calculating your household unit size. Yes, that includes everyone who's living in the household, including children. And then no, not necessarily the case for other vouchers. And the reason is because it depends on the source of funding for the different vouchers. Because the emergency housing vouchers are federal funding, they have a lot more immigration restrictions than like city FEPS, which is city funded. So because of those different sources of funding, there are different immigration eligibility restrictions. And so city FEPS, for those of you who don't know, like if you're eligible for this immigration status wise, if you're eligible for cash assistance, which includes more categories than the eligibility. And no, you cannot combine vouchers, something like this. So if you have one type of assistance, that's what you have. And if you apply for a U visa, that's a great question. That is a status that is definitely eligible for city FEPS. I'm not sure if it's eligible for EHV at this time. So now we're back to source of income discrimination. So basically, this source of income discrimination, when you're renting an apartment, your source of income is your voucher. And landlords and brokers can't discriminate against potential tenants based off of the fact that they'd be paying for the rent with a voucher rather than, like a different type of like earned income from work. And so they can't discriminate against you because you have a voucher. I cannot say this enough. If someone says we don't take vouchers, no programs, that's illegal. And people still do it all the time. They'll ghost you, they'll say things like this. That's not legal. That is source of income discrimination. And some other things to know kind of in this process is that landlords and brokers, like they might ask for certain documents and say they're required, but that's not always true. And so like, for example, if they're saying like, you know, you need to give me like pay stubs to show, or like I need to see your pay stubs, or I need to see your bank account, bank statement, things like that. If you don't have bank statements to provide, if you don't have pay stubs to provide, that's okay. You can only give them what you have. And so giving them, you know, maybe your voucher, like a copy of your voucher, giving them your budget letter from HRA, giving them a letter you have, like your social security, like an SSI letter, or a letter from work or a program or something like that. Those work. So when landlords and brokers are like asking for these really specific things, I know that can be really, you see that and you're intimidated and you're like, you know, that one's not for me. It is. It is for you. Like, try not to be dissuaded by these things that are, you know, not put in place to be super helpful. So I think a lot of with this housing search is really like, it's hard. It's really hard, and the odds are not like, people are not nice in this. It takes a lot of persistence, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of knowing your own rights, knowing this information, and keeping at it. Another thing, they're not allowed to deny you access to an apartment only because of your credit. And so they can ask for a credit search or a background check like Joya talked about, but they can't say you can't rent this apartment because your credit's too low. That can't be the only reason. That's not legal. And like, you have your voucher, that's gonna pay the rent. And there is a link to kind of a guide to housing search for voucher holders. It's really helpful to have like, you know, a good idea of kind of like if you're sending emails out to brokers and potential landlords, like you don't have to tell them about the voucher immediately. That's not, you're not being like dishonest in saying that. You're just like, hi, I'm interested in this unit. When can I see it? I'd be able to cover the rent, things like that. And then you can give your voucher, know all your rights, know all this information. It takes a long time and a lot of practice, but there are resources and tools to help you in this. We Unlock NYC is also an amazing resource. So I highly recommend everyone who is dealing with source of income discrimination, is doing the housing search in New York City, look at this website. They have really free and easy tools to report source of income discrimination. And so they'll help you like figure out how to make a report if you're seeing things like no vouchers. If a landlord is telling you on a phone call, we can't rent to you because we don't take Section 8. That is source of income discrimination. That's illegal and you can report it. And they also have some really cool like data and information about these are like some serial discriminators in New York City. Like these are maybe management companies or brokerages that discriminate a lot against, like that have a lot of reports of source of income discrimination. It also has tips of like knowing your rights with this, figuring out where you can rent for voucher holders. This program was started by voucher holders and they have a lot of good information. And so knowing your rights, reporting source of income discrimination when it is happening, trying not to get too, you know, put down about some of these tough experiences, I think it's a tough fight, but it's great to know that there are some resources on your side. And there is sometimes things are happening. Like there was one management company was fined $1 million for source of income discrimination. Like these things can make a difference and can help improve fair housing standards. So next, we have a little FAQ. So running through a few little potential scenarios. If the landlord or broker asks you, what is your monthly income? You can say, I have a Section 8 housing voucher that would be able to cover the rent. You can also, tell them your income and tell them whatever your sources of income are, but you don't necessarily need to have earned income to be able to rent. Which is what a lot of times landlords and brokers are going to say automatically, like, oh, or if you don't make 40 times the income, you can't rent here. That's not true. You have a voucher, you can use that. Next, if a landlord or broker says, we're not going to rent this apartment to you, you don't meet our income requirements. You can say, Amy can say, income requirements are calculated differently for voucher holders, and actually I would meet your requirements. So when they say something like that, that's source of income discrimination. You can report it, but you can also, yeah, Amy is badass. You can be like, that's not true. I actually do. I can rent this apartment. Just because I have a voucher doesn't mean that I can't rent this apartment, be a great tenant, and have the right to live in this place. Another thing a landlord or broker might ask, have you ever been to housing court? You can't say that. That is not a legal question, says Amy. Or she can say, no, I have not. But that is not something that a landlord or broker can ask and use against you. So knowing your rights in the housing search, kind of getting used to dealing with landlords and brokers, getting around, some of the things, those obstacles that they're putting out there to dissuade voucher holders from trying to find their apartments. It is hard to find a good spot in New York City. I totally get that. It's really hard. I have lots of clients when we're searching for apartments. It's a long process. It can be exhausting emotionally, physically. But knowing your rights and asking questions and reporting discrimination when you experience it will take you far. So then, once Amy found her apartment, she applied. She knew her rights when the landlord tried to discriminate. She said nope. And she found one that worked, was accepted by the landlord. What's going to happen after that? Find out next week in part 2B. So this is the end of the content for this part. So we'll have a brief Q&A, things like that. But part 2B next week, same time, we'll have all the information about the paperwork, the logistics, the move-in letters, the HAP contracts, all that really fun stuff. But for now, it's really important to know that there are some resources that you can go to with all these questions about your vouchers. I know that with your first placement, with your emergency housing voucher, you probably had a housing navigator, and they probably, hopefully, were super helpful in, navigating this whole process. What's going on? Who can I ask questions about what's happening with my voucher? And, we don't really have those as much anymore, especially after that initial placement. If you're trying to move again, there's a lot less support. But there are resources, places where you can go to ask questions. Our contact information is still there. It'll be there on the PowerPoint. And you can reach out to us, but also reach out to the agency that administers your voucher, either NYCHA or HPD. With NYCHA, they have a phone line. You'll probably be on the phone for a very long time, so just FYI, plan that in advance. But they also have walk-in centers, so you can make appointments online, usually about like a month to 6 weeks in advance. But you make an appointment and then you go in and you can see someone in person and talk to them about your voucher. For HPD, there is a phone number. I will say the past like 3 to 4 times I called this phone number and like followed all the prompts to get to the area. I end up getting voicemail, so it's a bit hit or miss, but it can be helpful if you're able to talk to a real human being. There are also HPD emails for all the different question topics, and so there's like portability unit, they have like one for inspections, all of the different topics, and so like there's that email list you can find online, so you can email them. Not super fast on the response time, to be completely honest, so there's that to keep in mind. What I would recommend is that if you're able to go in person to the HPD Section 8 Division of Tenant Resources office, it's at 100 Gold Street, it's in like Lower Manhattan, and this is a place where like you can go in, you don't need an appointment. You'll probably sit and wait for, I don't know, last time I was there was like half an hour-ish. But then you can go, it's like when you go to HRI and they put up little numbers and then you'll get called for your number and you can talk to a real person with questions about your voucher, questions about Section 8, questions about your move. And that can be really helpful. So that's open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The phone lines are fine, but if you can go in person and talk to real people, I find that that is often the most helpful for clients. With NYCHA, also they like everything in their self-service portal, so learning how to navigate that, playing around in your self-service portal to find all the information. And HPD, they do not have a portal. Again, they are just papers and forms and acoustic version. So going to them in person may be more helpful. You can also become a client at your borough's FJC, Family Justice Center. There's one of these in every single borough. And if you are a survivor of domestic violence, you can go receive services, and they have, like, you can be assigned a case manager there. So there will be case managers at the different boroughs, and you can go drop in, get answers about your case management questions, not just related to housing vouchers, but other issues as well. They have some housing specialists too. So that can be another resource for you. Now, Q&A. I know we threw a ton of information at you in the past hour and a bit. So now I want everyone to, process a little bit if you can. And if you have any questions that you would like answered, live in this presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat.
I think Tawana had a question about staying, like that timeline, right? Of when the transfer is accepted, but then staying in the current apartment until you move. I guess there's a little bit of that insecurity, right? Of like, if there's going to be a gap.
Yeah, there's no gap. You stay in your current apartment until you move to the next apartment. So that you, like, either NYCHA or HPD will pay your current landlord until they switch and pay the new landlord. And so you continue paying your portion of the rent up until you pay the new landlord. And so there is not a gap. Even once you get approved for a transfer, like during the process when you're searching and all of that, you're still continuing to live in your current apartment and pay your current rent. And
And
if
you, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have really personal questions about your specific situation that you don't want to, we don't need to get into all of the details of it on this, recorded webinar, then also I'm going to take this part out of the recording when we put it on Zoom. But yes, our emails and information are at the end. Feel free to take it and send us an email with more specific questions about your personal situation, and we're happy to consult.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if